Hi folks, you're with Tacitus today. Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. Please listen to this presentation as you would a radio broadcast. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the issue of and the definition of and the description of even bullying. Now, the term bully is coming up sort of multiple times a day, every day. Trump's a bully. We stand up to bullies. We fight back against bullies. Putin is a bully, bullying. Well, we won't put up with bullying. And so it's used all over the place now. And I look at some of the situations where the term and the word's used, and it seems to me to be inappropriate. What are they talking about, bullying? And of course, it's meant to be a word, like fascism or Nazi or Hitler, that's meant to have some sort of emotional resonance. And it's equivalent, I think, to calling out, fire in a crowded theatre. Fire! Oh, it gets attention and it gets traction. And they'll have tested this in focus groups. And what about if we call someone a naughty boy? What about if we call someone moral turpitude or something? What if we call someone a bully? Bing, bing! Suddenly everyone's bully. Did someone say bully? Did someone say Hitler? Swastika, Nazi? And it's one of those words that just gets the emotional traction. So it's used for that. And it's, most people, I think, remember, bullying, particularly from school, I guess. And so the term bully is something, or maybe, you've had a boss that's some sort of runaway, a mad person, and they resort to bullying and so on. So maybe it's something that everyone has come across it, everyone has experienced it sometimes. So the word bully just has that resonance and traction. Trump's a bully, because they keep on calling it fascist or a Nazi, but that's kind of wearing a bit thin. They need a new term. Let's use bully. Bingo, done. So I think bully's just one of those things now. It's entered the lexicon of anyone we don't like, and anyone doesn't agree with us or we don't agree with. Let's just call them a bully. Well, why are we calling them a bully? Who gives a fuck why we're calling it a bully? It's just one of those really good terms like Hitler or Nazi that always gets traction and gets heads turning. So, but like rape or any of these type of things that we see going on, any sort of, particularly in the area of race, gender type grifting, the definition has been expanded. Like if you look at the definition of what constitute, say, rape 50 years ago and the definition today, yes, I mean, you wouldn't even think it's the same thing. Somebody who has half a glass of wine a woman who has half a glass of wine too much can claim she didn't give consent, thus it's rape. Whereas, 50 years ago, you had to detain someone or threaten them, physically threaten them, or hold a gun to their head, or, these sorts of things. And that there had to be some sort of physical act before it could be considered as rape. But today it can be anything. So the threshold and the bar, has been lowered out of beyond all comprehension. And the definition expanded. The same, what constitutes violence now, what constitutes racism. I think that the definitions have been widely expanded, and bullying too has got a pretty decent expansion. Whether it's considered to be online bullying now, having a look at some of the legislation and some of the wording is so vague that anything could be bullying. And it's one line was includes being mean to people. That's now bullying. So if a radical feminist comes along and says, all men should be castrated, and you say, you silly feminist bitch, that's, you bully. Well, what about what she said? No, that doesn't count. You've got more social power. So they bring the social power thing into it as well, so that in order for a black person can't be racist to a white person because the white person has, in ideologically determined definitions, has social power. So you can't be racist against someone who has more social power, but the very definition and determination and allocation of social power is itself vague and ideological. So one ideological sort of determination then goes to the next ideological determination, and then the next, and so on, with not even an intervening fact in the middle of it all. So it's all ideological and vague. so that anyone can be a racist, anyone can be a rapist, anyone can be a Nazi and a bully and so on. And that's really what we're talking about here, which is, I think, an abuse of language. The idea that language once was meant to indicate, a precise meaning and a precise definition, so that everyone could be clear as to what it meant, in the same way that there's clearly codified law, so everybody is clear as to what it means and what transgression means and what conforming with the law means. All that's gone out the window, and it's everything is fluid and vague and relative, which then gives the state vast discretion as determining who the bad guys are and who the good guys are, who should be held culpable and who not, and so on. So, for example, the people that are destroying the Teslas in the United States, we haven't done anything wrong. We're just fighting back against Nazis. We haven't done anything wrong. They're the bad guys, not us. Or people that rig elections, or people that plant fake stories in the media, or falsely accuse, and so on. But we're only fighting back against Hitler. We're allowed to. They're the bad guys, not us. And this is sort of, I think, a cause or a part of the wider ramifications of losing precision in language and also codification of law. The British are taking it one step further, where they're codifying that if you come from a minority group, you should be less culpable. You should be treated differently in the law. The only people that are held to the high standard in the law are straight white Christians. Everyone else gets, in varying degrees, a free pass. So you can have someone that's committed, multiple rapes and assaults, who's brown, and they get, half the sentence of someone that put a mean tweet online. A white person who put a mean tweet online. That's the insanity of this, and it's a widespread insanity going all over the Western world to varying degrees. For example, someone brings the traffic in peak hour in the whole city to a standstill doing a climate protest. And they're a silly little bimbo idiot. But she not only gets no prison time, not only doesn't get a fine, but actually gets congratulated by the court because she's a stunning and brave woman. Even though she's a deluded airhead feminist, she's got no culpability at all. Whereas someone that puts a mean tweet out about mass migration, they've got half a dozen police knocking on the door. So the state, in my view, has become the bully there. But anyway, coming back to bullying, when I was a kid, the bully, for example, the idea that someone is a bully for pursuing an ideological sort of position. So there's various claims. Everyone's using the word bully now. So the people that are keying the Tesla cars, were damaging the dealerships and so on, damaging them in parking lots and the like, they're being referred to as bullies. Oh, well, I wouldn't call them bullies. I mean, I don't see it that way. I mean, you can say they're deluded and all that sort of stuff, and ideologically captured for sure. But they do believe in what they're doing, and they believe, as mistakenly and ridiculously as it is, they believe they're somehow fighting back against Nazis, and therefore they're justified in what they're doing. They're the same people that say, well, rigging the 2020 presidential election was a great thing because we're fighting back against Hitler and so on. So they've lost the moral compass of right and wrong. And a lot of this is encouraged at schools, and that we're surrounded by Nazis and you're the resistance fighting back against these. Well, how can you be the resistance when the government, the media, and all the corporations are on your side? How can you be the resistance when you're part of the whole system itself? They don't seem to understand that, which suggests they're not really very bright. But in terms of bullying, I wouldn't use the term bullying for that. Ideological terrorists and so on, sure, but bullying, no. The idea of calling, Donald Trump a bully, President Trump a bully, because he says, look, if you're putting 200% tariffs on American products, we're going to put 200% tariffs on your products. Oh, the bullying, the bully. We stand up to bullies. We fight back against bullies. We're stunning and brave, fighting back. No. what's this bullying stuff, you fucking morons? You're putting 200% tariffs on American products. They're putting now 200% tariffs on your products. You put the tariffs on first. Doesn't that make you the bully then, by your definition, you fucking idiot? So I don't accept those sort of tags. And bullying is being thrown around, all over the place, and particularly against someone like President Trump or anyone on President Trump. You disagree with transgender. Yeah, you're a bully. You're a bully. And that's after and before you're a Nazi and a fascist. So, and clearly it's a prearranged talking point that everyone's using. Now, I remember going back at, say, school, that the concept of bullying, where it happens, how it happens, and under what circumstances, there are people that I recall as a kid anyway, just naturally brutish. They were just brutish people, and they seemed to like the idea of inflicting, just for the hell of it, inflicting hurt and pain. They liked to see the fear in someone's face, and they would, if they didn't have a reason to bully you, they would invent one. What are you looking at? What did you say to me? That type of stuff. And now I went to a number of different schools as a kid, in different socioeconomic classes, and some in rural areas, with small town sort of rural, some in the city, some in mercifully briefly, some in poor high migrant areas, and others in quite well-to-do homogenous areas. So now, my experience of this was that in the high migrant area, which is a poorer area, then bullying was absolutely rampant. It was off the charts. Kids were looking for people they could pick on to beat up and attack and inflict pain and suffering on. They enjoyed it. They just seemed to enjoy causing discomfort and so on to others. They clearly, and I remember, clearly got off on this, how they'd arrive, a group of Arabic kids were the prime, folks here, but a group of Arabic kids would decide to pick on some kids, which, by the way, could be another Arabic kid or a white kid or whatever. It didn't matter. They weren't racially prejudiced in that regard, but they would arrive in a group and you fucking, and then they'd start straight away, the language and the whole thing, and they would clearly enjoyed the look of fear on someone's face. That they just enjoyed it. They clearly, so that was something that it was their buzz for the day. It was their I don't know, the equivalent of snorting white powder for 12-year-olds. But they went around doing these groups, and again they enjoyed it, and they would find areas where they could intercept kids, kids that maybe had got something for, say at the school shop, like the canteen, and some kids got a sandwich or a cake or something, and that they would hang around in groups there and try and steal the kids' food item that they just got, and if they couldn't get it, they then try and knock it out of the hand of the kids so it would go on the ground where they could stamp on it. And there was a certain, just a malicious vindictiveness that ran through them, and that was the bullying that they enjoy, including many of them had sort of these strange respiratory problems, so they would hack up some pretty green bodily fluids and then spit it onto people, and this was something, and they would go into people's school bags, and especially in summer where a lot of, back in those days, a lot of kids would bring drink bottles to school, and they would open the drink bottle and then hack the bodily fluids into the drink bottle and do it back up again. But hack into the sandwiches. They were constantly, they couldn't seem to not do it. But the thing that I came away with was how much they enjoyed it. The idea of inflicting hurt, pain, and suffering on others was something they clearly enjoyed. I could never understand that. Why would, unless you had a personal issue with somebody, that person had done you wrong and you were trying to retaliate. That I could sort of get. I could make the connection between the cause and effect type connection. But this was just random people. They were just doing it to. There were kids that would sort of show fear and terror on their face, sort of more noticeably than others, and they were constantly picked on by these Arabic gangs. And the bullying was sort of done on a group basis. So if one of them would come up to you and threaten you, and you'd sort of push them away and say, fuck off, then they would come back with 3 or 4 of their Arabic buddies, and then they would attack you as a group again, kicking you, spitting on you. So this was something, that a bullying thing that certainly I particularly wasn't a recipient of this. They didn't seem to bother with me too much. But there were certainly others that copped the shit. Now, of all the bullies that I recall, the ones that were willful and purposeful in their town, I don't really recall any white people doing it. There would always be the odd one that would have a bad day or something, but generally, I didn't really see. I'm just sort of thinking back now. I don't recall really any white. Now, this was in an area, a fairly poor area. The folks were getting a house in a nice area, sort of like renovated and done stuff. So they wanted to save some pennies. So we ended up being in this poorer area for fortunately not too long. But it was a bit of a culture shock, just the sheer Britishness of the people there. Now, I assume they led British lives. They led violent British lives, and this was reflected in the behaviour that they engaged in. Now, going into a wealthier and all, by the way, all homogenous. It was 100% white area. I don't recall any bullying, and this was the difference. Now, it's a more affluent area, sure. Instead of people's parents being labourers digging the road or something, these people were all professional folks and managing directors of companies and that sort of stuff. So they didn't. I don't recall any bullying there. I mean, I remember seeing it. There was a few instances of it, but generally, I don't remember seeing. So when we're looking at bullying, it's the definition of a willful and purposeful attempt to humiliate, harm, or some others. Now, certainly by my experience, the non-white communities, it's rampant. Whereas the more white the community gets, and certainly with a bit more affluence, then the less likely it is. And I see this for sort of people that are, I work with and have been colleagues and so on. There are those that wouldn't dream of bullying another person. Why would you want to do it? You sit down, you explain things to them, and so. And there are others that again, that they've just come from that British sort of environment, or they come from minorities, black people, many of the Arabic and Middle Eastern communities, where also, there was I was talking to a guy who's half Pakistani, half Chinese, or half Indian, half Chinese, and he went to school in an area that was Chinese, and he said he was ruthlessly picked on and bullied all the time, simply because he wasn't a pure blood Chinese or Indian. Now, I've heard that before. Japanese kids tell me too that in certain areas and schools and places they're bullied relentlessly, and which sort of surprises me a little bit, because the Japanese seem very well behaved and seem to go out of their way to maintain good relations, but nonetheless. So bullying, I'm just putting it in some perspective. Bullying is something that I think is relative to the environment, the circumstances, the upbringing, the affluence, and the strange desire of some people to want to just really get off on the idea of inflicting pain and suffering on others. Now, I remember the kids at school, the cane, they used to use the cane in those days, and some of these Arabic kids were being caned almost every day for what, the bullying, but it never stopped them. The only lesson they took from getting the cane was they just had to be even smarter in not being found out. As long as I can get away with it undetected, I'm okay, rather than stopping the bad behavior. And this was something that intrigued me I'm like 11 or 12 years old or something. So I'm looking at it, it's crazy. I mean, this kid's had the cane, every fucking 5 minutes of the day. This is where they use a bamboo stick and they hit you on the hand, and yet they seem to be oblivious to cause and effect. So it struck me as very strange. But bullying is being used all over the place as a term, and I think it's being misused. Been with Tacitus today, your Pushback channel. Thank you for listening.